Built in 1872, the Idaho Penitentiary operated for over a century. Today, it's a historic site just outside of downtown Boise. I had the chance to take a tour and learn about the history of this genuinely creepy site. This is kind of scary.
All right, welcome to the old Idaho Penitentiary.
I don't think I've ever been to a penitentiary before, and the fact that we just left the gate open is probably not a good thing.
Well, it's good for us because we can make our escape. So, yeah, so this is the main yard that we're entering right now. Even the sidewalks we're on had a purpose. This middle one here was for guards only. There are sidewalks to the side that would have been for inmates. And so as soon as you entered, there was a world of order that you needed to know.
Is there a reason why the inmates couldn't walk down the center sidewalk?
You know, it just has a lot to do with structure and making sure that
just
everyone knows their place.
Okay. Yeah,
Exactly.
very
absolutely.
Quickly learn your place, and you have to stay to either the left or the right side.
Absolutely.
And not be center focused.
Yeah. So over 101 years of history is when, it was open from 1872 to 1973. And since 1974, we've been open as a museum.
How many inmates did this penitentiary house at any given time?
The maximum number we had was about 630, and those were in those later years. It could hold more, but they didn't prefer it to hold more just because of best practices for corrections, and on average around 300 or so.
Okay, wow. So in your 101-year history, I'm sure there's been some run-ins with the inmates.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. The big ones were in the riots that were in the later years. Actually destroyed some of the older buildings. The inmates had been grown tired of the conditions, and they were pretty antiquated by 1973. And so they actually started some of the buildings on fire and destroyed them. So you'll see that as we walk through the remnants of that.
Okay, so what types of criminals were in here?
Really ranged. It was a medium and maximum facility. So you could have everyone from somebody who wrote bad checks frequently.
A bad check writer could find himself.
Bad check, insufficient funds check.
Oh boy. I know a lot of people who would be locked up in here right now.
Right. We may have all had indiscretions in our past with overdrafts, but yeah, no, there were inmates that were in for that, believe it or not. And then everything from theft, robbery, up to first-degree murder. So.
And these cells are not very large.
They are not. So this is number 2 house, which we're in right now, and these were 2-man cells. Mm-hmm. And so in this cell house alone, 160 inmates could fit in here.
In here, really?
Yeah. And
because there's 4 levels here.
There is four levels. You may have noticed there is no indoor plumbing, so just a bucket in the corner for the
very luxurious accommodations.
Yes.
I see. So you put the bucket back in there when you were done using the bucket.
Yes, and then during the day they would take it out, dump it out, have it dry out there so that it could at least try to air it out a little bit. Now these over here are the punishment cells. So there's always the conundrum of what do you do with men who are already being punished. Yeah. And this was the solution.
When the guards found a prisoner with a shank.
Exactly. And actually, you could be punished for insolence. So that's talking back to the guards, talking while in the dining hall. That was forbidden for quite some time. So any of those offenses, minor or otherwise, you could wind up in the punishment cells. The earliest ones, they didn't have enough room for isolation. So there could be up to 6 men inside one cell at a time being punished. Okay,
this is just creepier to begin with.
So this is the cooler. It's thought that it was called the cooler for them to come and cool down from being hot-tempered or whatever it was. Also, it's frigidly cold in here. There was only one source of heat, so we think that also had something to do with it. They all had steel doors inside, and again, up to 6 men inside one cell with just a bucket in the corner as a restroom facility.
Oh, wow. And how long would someone stay in here?
They had no idea going in how long they'd be there. So it could just be for a day, or it could be for months. The longest recorded in our solitary confinement cells was 1.5 years, so 18 months of isolation. And so eventually, that wasn't quite enough for punishment, so they had to build additional cells. And this is true solitary confinement, what we're about to go into. Okay. And it was called Siberia. You can think when you
called
think of
Siberia?
Siberia, so you think isolation, cold, freezing. That's what this was. Of course, in the summertime,
Oh my gosh.
here in Boise, it's the exact opposite. It's very, very hot. So the tricks for them to stay cool was not a very fun trick. They would actually stuff into, you'll see that there's a hole that was used as a restroom. So it's just a hole in the ground, but it was in a plumbing system. So they would stuff their mattresses or their blankets inside of there, and then it would flood. However, you have to imagine what else comes up when something like that is flooded. So it might keep them cool for a while, but it probably didn't smell great.
No.
And then in the wintertime, there was literally ice that they could scrape off the walls at some point. So not the place you want it to be, for sure. So we're trying to do that more and more, connect corrections back to this place. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting how some things are the same, and after 100 years, and of course how they've drastically changed. And
I was going to say, I don't know if they would still allow ice being on the walls in a
right,
particular
exactly.
situation any longer.
No, they wouldn't. Lots more human rights things that they have to consider, and you might argue one way or the other. We have a lot of opinions, but this was a pretty bleak and desperate place that, keeping in mind that 97%, at least currently, 97% of offenders will be released. And so do we want somebody who's really hardened by a place or by policy? Mm-hmm. So something to consider.
Isn't it a bit shocking what the conditions were like living there?
I can't believe there was no heat, it was crazy.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like my kind of place.
Is that where you send everybody?
Very cold, very, very cold. Visit history.idaho.gov to learn about the events that they host there, including the Frightened Felons Night happening this weekend.